Hi, today we'll be discussing about features of microservices in Spring Boot. I want to explain the various key features of the microservices architecture, how we can build it. So I want to explain that in this video. You can just listen to my video. So Spring Boot provides a specific features that simplifies the development of microservices and their integration into robust distributed system, often in conjunction with the Spring Cloud. We all know the Spring Cloud. The this features and these dependencies were provided in Spring to simplifies the implementation of the microservices architecture. What are the core development and deployment features of the Spring microservices? The first thing is the auto configuration, right? Earlier in Spring, you don't need to, you have to provide all the configurations of the dependencies and other features, setter injection, construction injection, and the dependencies and beans, how many beans you are going to define. Everything you need to define inside an XML configuration, right? And if you want, you need to handle the inversion of control. The dependency injection should be handled by the developer itself. So if the more the complex is the application, then it is difficult to manage the dependencies also. Let's say if you developed an application having 1,000, 2,000 classes, and suddenly you got a requirement after some time, then you have to again understand the application. If new developer comes into picture there, he has to understand the dependencies, how they are configured, how the dependencies are injected. He has to look at the XML file, or if it is a Java based configuration, he has to understand the how the dependencies are auto wired. You have to see that. He has to understand that whole picture. It is a complex, kind of tedious process for developer to do that kind of task, which is why Spring Boot simplified that auto configuration. You don't need to uh, take care of the dependencies and management. It is the auto configuration. All the dependencies are automatically configured and injected into required beans, as we specified. We have a lot of annotations. They'll remove the boilerplate coding, all these configurations. You don't need to do that. So auto configuration, Spring Auto, you just use at the rate enable auto configuration annotation. It will automatically auto configure all the data source details, all the configuration properties, all the components. It will include everything there. Let me show you the simple example. I will also explain the code also today. You can see how I'm going to we are going to see it. It's auto configuration Spring Boot. uh, you see here, simple example. We need a example, right? I'm going to type an example here. Okay, now you see, first we need to have a starter dependency. Spring Boot starter web dependency is a mandatory dependency. After that, we have to create a main class at the Spring Boot application. And you see here, at the rate Spring Boot application, internally it wraps the at the rate enable auto configuration at the rate component scan. At the rate auto configuration, enable auto configuration is for enabling the auto configuration of properties. It will automatically auto wire and auto configure all the dependencies, required components, required what beans, everything. They'll be auto configured. At the rate component scan generally used to scan the package of the classes, right? So these two are interlinked inside at the rate auto configuration, and sorry, inside at the rate Spring Boot application there is at the rate enable auto configuration annotation. There is also at the rate component scan. Okay, if you use at the rate Spring Boot application, both are included inside that at the rate Spring Boot application. And you can see the simple controller. And what happens here, when you start the application, we have embedded server automatically. It detects the web dependencies on class path, and it registers the necessary Spring MVC components like dispatch earlier to handle the web request. You're getting it right. We are not, nowhere we are not specifying any dispatches earlier dependencies are being configured. We are not doing it. simply single annotation which eliminated all the boilerplate code. It simplifies the thing. So that is why we have the Spring Boot, the beautiful option in the microservices. One of the features is you don't need to auto configure, take care of dependency injection automatically. It will be taken care by the Spring Boot itself. That is the other thing. Okay, let's jump into the main part now. So auto configuration is one feature. Using a Spring Boot, you can achieve the auto configuration. Other thing is the starter dependencies, right? Starter dependencies are I have included Spring Boot starter web dependency, right? This is the basic dependency. When we are developing the Spring, you need to include all the required web dependency, web modules, web related jar and data source related jars and other related jars. The starter dependencies are nothing but it will include all the jars inside it. If you simply specify one name, Spring Boot starter name, it will download all the required libraries that is required to build a simple application. Like we need a web jars, we need a data source jars, we need a transaction related jar. It will download everything, right? That is why starter dependencies is the key feature, one of the features, right? Other thing is embedded servers. Spring Boot, each microservices can run as a standalone server executable jar, right? We can include a embedded server. So Spring Boot comes up with the feature of a embedded server concept where you can include Tomcat, Jetty, Undertow. You can include. You can actually uh, use any embedded server you want. So rapid and independent deployment. It is very faster. Development is very faster. That is one of the things. RESTful API development. We can develop a any RESTful API because we have a lot of annotations like REST controller, get mapping, post mapping, put mapping, delete mapping. So many things are there. So you see the architecture and resilience features basically is using a Spring Cloud. So tools like Netflix, Eureka, Console integrated via Spring Cloud act as a directory where microservices register themselves. I'm talking about our service discovery and registration. What is this Eureka server or service discovery? Basically, we when we are developing multiple applications, multiple servers, we actually uh, m- establish a communication among multiple services, right? How they will communicate? If there are many microservices, how they will recognize their host name, host details, endpoint details. So it should be kind of a dynamic, right? We should not hard code these details, right? So that is why we need a service discovery. Services should be discovered dynamically whenever a particular service is trying to communicate other service. That is why we actually register all our services to the service discovery so that any microservice can communicate any other service. So if you want, I can also give a simple sorry, let me explain. Example code. I am examples. Okay, you can see here we need a code, right? I want to explain the code as well, right? Code in Java. Oh, you see Spring Cloud framework, especially with the service registry like Netflix Eureka. We all know that Netflix is very well famous for entertainment, movie streaming website. But Netflix also providing, you see, Eureka. It is provided some features along with the Spring Cloud framework. So we can also use, see they named like this Netflix Eureka. You can see we need to include Spring Cloud Starter Netflix Eureka server. This dependency is required because the Spring Cloud Starter Netflix Eureka server is the main starter dependency. It will download all the required details to create a service registry. First thing is I want to create the server, right? For that I need to annotate this at the rate enable Eureka server. What this will do, it will actually create and the server, and then I have to specify one property in application.properties file. Just remember one thing here. You need to mark down this one. Eureka.client.register with Eureka equal to false and fetch registry equal to false. You see, why did I mention these two things are false? Because this is a server. I don't want to make it as a client, right? When you specify this property as a false, register with Eureka, client dot register with Eureka, client dot fetch registry equal to false. When you make them both are false, then this service will be marked as server, Eureka server, not the Eureka client, because all other clients will register. They have to register for this server, they will communicate with this server, right? That is why what we have to do, first we have to create a server, and then we have to create a client. You see, now I'm creating another client. I need to include Spring Cloud, Starter, Netflix, Eureka client dependency here. There in the server, it is a server dependency. Here it is a client dependency. And then I need to enable use a annotation at the rate enable Eureka client. In the server, I have used at the rate enable Eureka server, but here I have used at the rate enable Eureka client. You see here and the configurations, and you see I did not mention any other properties which I mentioned in the server. You can see here in the server I used Eureka dot client dot register with Eureka dot client dot fetch registry. These two properties were missing in the client properties file. You see here. That way, what is happening here, this will be marked as a client. And one extra property we need to mention here, eureka.client.service url dot default zone equal to http slash slash localhost 8761 slash eureka slash. What does that mean? What is this host endpoint host URL? This is the Eureka server URL, because we actually ran the server, right? You see, when we ran this server, it will up and running using the port 8761. This is the server port, right? That is why we have to point that service URL, Eureka client service URL default zone. We are registering this service to that particular Eureka server. We will register all the service in the same way. That way, whenever some other particular service is trying to invoke this particular server, automatically it will first access the Eureka server. From there, it will get the respective service endpoint. You can see here. Discovery code. Use discovery client to find the instances of the service. Discovery client finds the host and port dynamically. You can see discovery client automatically finds the host and port dynamically. Okay, you can see finally another service client can discover service here by its name. It can simply use the service name here. I just mentioned spring dot application dot name equal to service hyphen a. Right? If any client is trying to invoke this particular service, they can simply call this service name. They don't need to specify the entire URL and port name of this particular service. It is a kind of confusing process, right? If there are 1,000 services, for each and every service you cannot remember and you cannot hard code the local host and port details of the particular service, right? So that is why we are using this particular service. Okay, so far we discussed this one. We will also discuss further more, but for now these are the feature I wanted to explain. Thank you.